Okay, simple interest. So simple interest is basically, should be revision. The equation itself will only calculate the interest, not the balance of the account. So one of the main complications is just to read the question carefully. Sometimes they're asking you for the balance or how much money you've got. Sometimes they ask you for the interest. The formula will give you the interest, and it's basically your principal, which is your starting amount of money, times your interest rate, which must be recorded as a decimal. So if you think you're likely to forget that, then on your formula, maybe put the divide by 100 to remind yourself to do that, and then times time. Now, the other thing that you need to remember is that in this formula, the interest rate and the time must be referring to the same time period. So typically an interest rate is quoted as a per annum amount, and often they'll write that with the little p.a. Oops, hang on, sorry, try that again. So often they'll write p.a next to the interest rate, so they might say 5% per annum, and that means each year. So which means our time, we should also put in years. So typically, it doesn't actually matter which way we go as long as the interest rate and the time are the same time periods. But typically, as the interest rate is quoted in years, we will also put time in years. Now, what that means effectively is that if my time was given in days, then write down however many days they've told you and divide that number by 365 to turn it into a year, which might be a proper fraction or an improper fraction depending on how many days, and that's okay. If they give you time in months, divide it by 12. So whatever months they tell you it is, you'd divide by 12. So if they said 18 months, that's 1.5 years. So 18 divided by 12 would give you a 1.5. But that might not always be as nice in terms of the numbers that fall out. Doesn't matter, don't overthink it. If it was in weeks, then you'll do the same. You'd put down the number of weeks that they've told you and divide it by 52. So at times you'll need to remember that for your time, and always for time for the interest rate you need to remember to record it as a decimal. Now the other thing that they'll do is sometimes they're not looking for the interest or the balance. Sometimes they're looking for how much principal would I need to start with in order to earn a particular amount of interest, or so on. So we need to just rearrange that equation essentially. So the equation always holds, sorry, I'm trying to get a highlighter there. So the equation always holds, and basically every single question comes back to that equation, but I can rearrange that equation to isolate the principal. So if I want a principal, then the interest is staying on its own over here, and I'm essentially moving the R and the T, which would give me this formula here. Or if I want the interest rate, I could rearrange the formula that would then become the interest that I've earned divided by P times T. And don't forget, sometimes they don't tell you the interest either. They'll tell you the starting balance and they'll tell you the end balance. So the end balance take away the start balance. The difference between what you finished with and what you started with can only come from interest. So sometimes you need to calculate the interest for yourself first. And the final rearrangement would be to get time. So you can do T is equal to I divided by P times R. Now, if you had to do them mentally, that's the way you're going to proceed. However, don't forget, in ClassPad, you can just stick to the original formula, the P times R times T, and then go highlight, interactive, advanced solve to resolve any of your questions. So keep that one up your sleeve, and that would save you doing it. There's also a little app. The Simple Interest app is in days. It's not always as helpful. So let's carry on from there. Now, simple interest, when we have a loan on simple interest, basically what we need to repay is the money that we've borrowed plus the interest that we've accrued on that loan. So our repayment is the principal plus the interest, and the defining feature of simple interest scenarios is that we repay it in equal instalments. So whatever we owe, we just divide what we owe by the number of payments that we're going to make. So if I was paying off my loan monthly for 3 years. So in this next question, I've said we're going to purchase a $15,000 car, or take a loan out of $15,000 for a car. We're going to pay 5% simple interest over 3 years. And we want to calculate our monthly repayments. So our total repayments, we need to pay back the $15,000 that we borrowed, plus the interest, which is my P times my R, it's a decimal, times my time. So that second part of the equation gives me the interest. And we just divide that by our total payments, which is 12 times a year times my 3 years would give me a total of the 36 payments, and that means that each payment would have come out at $479.17. Don't forget to round it to dollars and cents, because we're talking about currencies in these questions. Okay, The other place that you'll use simple interest is in the bank account kind of questions. And there's two things they're going to do here. One's going to be what we call a minimum monthly balance, and the other one's going to be a daily balance. They're both simple, and essentially both of them are just doing your interest is equal to your principal times your interest rate times time, the same formula. However, in this case, for both cases, we're going to use a daily interest rate, and our time will be in days. So, and the way we proceed will just depend on which one we're doing, whether it's a minimum balance question or whether it's a daily balance. So read those questions carefully. So, interest is always calculated using days. So obviously we're going to get whatever our interest rate is as a decimal. So if you think you're going to forget that, in your equation, put your divide by 100 in there to make sure you start with a decimal interest rate, and then divide it by 365 to turn it into a daily interest rate. You're then going to times it out by the number of days. So in the case of a minimum monthly balance question, you'll look at your bank account, you'll find the smallest balance for each month, and you'll use that as your principal. And then the time will be in days, so it depends on which month it is. So if we're looking at February, we've got 28 days. If we're looking at March, then we're going to have 31 and so on. If you're not very good at remembering how many days there are in each month, then you're going to use that knuckle trick. So if you just make a fist and started with your first knuckle as January, and then go along January, February would be in a dip, March would be on a knuckle, April would be in a dip. Basically every month that's on a knuckle has 31 days, and every month that's in the dip between your knuckles has 30 days, with the exception of course of February. So if we did this example below, and I'm going to use this one bank balance, and I'm going to do both the minimum monthly balance using this that account, and I'm also going to do the daily balance. So starting with the minimum monthly balance, I've actually got 3 months of sort of data here. I've got February, and then I've got a big chunk of March, and then I've got April. So in February I've only got the one balance, so of course I'm going to use that 650. So I'm going to go 650.42, that was my balance for February, times it by my 3.6% interest rate, divided by 365 to turn it into a daily one, and then times it by the 28 days for February, and that would give me my balance for Feb. For March, I'm looking at I'll change colours here. So for March, I'm looking for all of the balances over March, and I'm looking for the smallest one. So you can see the smallest balance in March is 57.80. So that would become my principal for March. So it'd be 57.80 times that same daily interest rate times the number of days in March, which is there, and I'd calculate that number. And then I'd do the same for April. So for April, I had a balance of $897.36, times that again by my daily interest rate. And in this case, I'm assuming, of course, that we've got the full account and that there wasn't more transactions in April. And then times it by the number of days in April, which is 30. And away I'd go, and that would give me my interest for each of those months. Now, if I was doing a daily balance, then basically it's the same, but it's a lot more painful because we've got to calculate the interest every time there's a change in the balance of this account. So our initial principal, I'll just see if I can get rid of all these marks. Okay, so our initial principal, our opening balance is 650, and that occurs between the 13th of February and the 10th of March. So you can see here in my calculations, I start with the balance at the beginning of that time, times it by the daily interest rate, and what I've got to work out is how many days are there between the 13th of February and the 10th of March. So if I count up from the 13th of February to the 10th of March, there was 25 days, and that means I would have got $1.60 of interest in that first part of that account. Now my balance then changes to $949. So I would then record my $949, times it by the interest rate, and work out how many days I had that balance for. So that balance of $949 applied between the 10th of March and the 17th of March. So you can see there were 7 days between before that balance changed, and that is why I've times that by 7 here, which gave me 66 cents for that next part of the month. And then we carry on to the next balance. So my next balance is $1,007.80. So I record my $1,007.80, again, times it by the daily interest rate, and then times it by how many days did I have that balance. Well, in this case, it was the 17th of March to the 18th of March, so it was only the 1 day. So you can see I then times it by 1, and so on. We pick up the next balance, times it by the daily interest rate, work out how many days. So the next one was between the 18th of March and the 25th of March. And so you go. So it's not difficult, it's just painful. You need to use the daily interest rate and just work out how many days there are between. Keep an eye on that to make sure you get your days right, show your calculations in case you forget how many days there are in a month, and you proceed on till you get to the bottom. So in this case, we got $3.26 of interest over the account that was shown there. Now, the only other note I've got is about rounding. It's like all things in maths, you've got to be really careful with rounding in between steps. So I have in all of these rounded you to the nearest, the 2 decimals, because it's dollars and cents. However, financial transactions actually happened digitally, so all those decimals kind of stay in the system. So really I should do this as one big equation, and if I did that, it only makes about 1 cent, but if I did that, I would have wound up with an answer of $3.25, which would actually be the correct one. Same if you're purchasing things, you might have something that's only worth 3 cents. We'd tend to round it up. If you're paying for it at a till, it would be rounded up to 5 cents. But if you pay for it on a card, it would actually go through as the 3 cents because it's a digital transaction. And if you bought multiple lots of that item, then of course those 3 cents add up. And so the rounding will certainly affect it. If you rounded it to the 5 cents initially and then times it out, you're going to get a far different result. So just watch your rounding. In theory, we shouldn't round to the end. But to make sure you get all your marks, show your working so I can see that you've got the process correct and you should be all right. Okay, we might do the compound interest one on a separate video. Thank you.